Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Sunday, September 4th, 2023. And we are live. It is Labor Day. Hope everybody had a safe Labor Day weekend. We're going to deal with the African American roots of Labor Day. This is a deep historical conversation. It gets into the history of slavery, the Industrial Revolution, the Pullman workers' strike of 1894. It gets into understanding the history of the Panic of 1893, which was a huge depression in the United States. This leads to that Pullman workers' strike in 1894. And it also involves racism because the Pullman Porters, who we hear so much about, were not allowed to strike because they were not allowed to join the union, the white union, because of racism. Okay, so I did this presentation in 2019 and 2021, and I've expounded on. I was reviewing my notes today, so I have a ton of information. So bear with me. When I did this broadcast, when I did this presentation in 2021, it was 2 hours and 43 minutes. I don't want to do 2 hours and 43 minutes today, but we'll see. Okay. So I have a lot of information to share with you. Okay. Give us a thumbs up, give us a like on this broadcast, share this broadcast on your social media platforms, invite your friends to tune in also. I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. All right. So the African American origins of Labor Day, the African American origins of Labor Day, and you can also listen to our radio show Sundays 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We broadcast on our social media platforms. We were on 9:10 a.m. Superstation WFDF, but they've done a format change, so we're not on there anymore. But it doesn't stop us getting the information out. All right, now, anytime I do a presentation, I know I may say some things that are outside the circumference of some people's awareness. And I usually have people put their fingers together to form a circle. I usually say something like this: the space inside this circle represents my realm of knowledge. Everything that I think I know about whatever I think I know is represented within the circumference of this circle. I must keep in mind that there are still things to know that exist outside of the circumference of my own awareness. So the reason why I say this, and I start on my presentations with this, is because oftentimes when people hear something that contradicts what they've been taught, what they believe, or what they think they know, they automatically reject it without doing any research to determine the validity of the new information that they're learning. And at the same time, they usually don't use that same level of scrutiny to analyze and critique or evaluate the new information that they're learning. So just because you know everything that you know about what you know does not mean you know everything there is to know about what you know. There's still things that exist outside the circumference of your own awareness. And I learned this from one of my teachers, Dr. Ray Hagins of the African Village. Okay, was in St. Louis, now in Atlanta, Georgia, the headquarters. All right, now let's jump into this. And I'm going to refer to my notes as well. I have 10 pages of notes. I have 10 pages of notes on this topic, notes that I've compiled over the years. And then I also have this PowerPoint presentation as well, and some articles we're going to reference also. All right. So what is Labor Day? What is Labor Day? Labor Day 2023 falls on September 4th. Labor Day pays tribute to the contributions and achievements of American workers and is the achievement of American workers and is traditionally observed on the first Monday in September. Traditionally observed on the first Monday in September. It was created by the labor movement in the late 19th century and became a federal holiday in 1894. Labor Day weekend also symbolizes the end of summer for many Americans and is celebrated with parties, street parades, and athletic events. So we know in a lot of cities, the day after Labor Day, summer vacation ends for school children. They go back to school, things like this. So it's the unofficial end of summer. Now we know summer officially ends around September 20th or 21st, which is the autumnal equinox. Is based upon astronomy when summer ends, not a date chosen on a calendar based upon a law that was passed in 1894, signed into law by President Stephen Grover Cleveland. Okay, that's not what determines when summer ends, but this is the unofficial end of summer. All right, now when we look at the what precedes Labor Day and precedes that federal holiday coming into existence in 1894 as a way to appease striking union workers, those union workers who worked for George Pullman. We have to look at what's known as the Panic of 1893. The Panic of 1893. And this was a huge depression in the United States. I'm not sure if this was a bigger depression than the depression we know of, known as the Great Depression of 1929, after the stock market crash in October 1929. But at this point in time, this was the worst depression in the history of this country. So the Panic of 1893 was one of the most severe financial crises in the history of the United States. The crisis started with banks in the interior of the country. Instability arose for two key reasons. First, gold reserves maintained by the U.S. Treasury fell to about $100 million from $190 million in 1890. At the time, the United States was on the gold standard, which meant the notes issued by the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury Department, could be redeemed for a fixed amount of gold, Now, the falling gold reserves raised concerns at home and abroad, outside the United States, internationally, that the United States might be forced to suspend the convertibility of Treasury notes, which may have prompted depositors to withdraw banknotes and convert their wealth into gold. The second source of the instability, which leads to this Panic of 1893, this Great Depression, was that economic activity slowed prior to the Panic of 1893. The recession or depression raised rates of defaults on loans, which weakened banks' balance sheets. Fearing for the safety of their deposits, men and women began to withdraw funds from banks. Fear spread and withdrawals accelerated, leading to widespread runs on banks. So federalreservehistory.org has a article, Banking Panics of the Gilded Age, 1863 to 1913, where they go in depth and look at the Panic of 1893. That's one of the sources. This is one of the many sources I looked at for this. Also, encyclopedia.com has some really good information from different online encyclopedias dealing with the Panic of 1893. So here's what we see that took place in 1893. By the end of 1893, we saw 642 banks that collapsed, wiping out their depositors' savings. We saw 16,000 individual businesses failed in 1893. 1 in 5 people in a working population of 15 million were without a job. The unemployment rate in the United States exceeded 10%. The railroad sector was hit very hard as well. Railroad sectors, you had over 150 railroad companies holding more than 30 miles of railroad track and were worth about $2.5 billion. You have 150 railroad companies that go bankrupt in 1893 as well. Okay, this worsens this financial crisis. So that means they're going to have to lay off employees. This has a ripple effect. They can't buy the iron or steel from the manufacturers of the metals. So this has a ripple effect throughout the economy. Okay, but it gets worse. It wasn't just that. Now, in 1873, the U.S. Congress stops making silver dollars, and America is placed on the gold standard. All right. So, because they stopped making silver dollars, this decreased the demand for silver, but the silver mines are still going to be mining silver at the same time. Okay. Which then causes a surplus of silver, which drives down the price of silver in this country. We're also going to see falling prices or values of gold in the United States as well. Now, labor strikes at silver mines in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado and nearby regions began in 1875 and continued through the 1880s, causing the price of silver to fall even more. Silver mine workers' wages are going to be cut as the value of silver drops. Also, you have a devastating impact on farmers as well. Now, farmers were going through were going further into debt, okay, right around this time, right around 1893 and a little before, as prices per bushel of crops declined quickly due to increased foreign competition and supply. So we see international factors, we see domestic factors that lead to what's known as the Panic of 1893, which was a huge depression in this country. Now, gold reserves dropped below $100 million from $190 million, weakening an already unsteady trust in the federal government. The gold standard meant that Treasury notes issued by the U.S. Treasury could be redeemed for a fixed amount of gold. The falling gold reserves raised concerns at home and abroad that the United States might be forced to suspend the convertibility of notes, which may have prompted depositors to withdraw banknotes and convert their wealth into gold. Okay, so we see all this taking place around the same time. Now, okay, so these are some of the things that lead to the Panic of 1893, okay, which is a huge depression in this country. And in 1894, we're going to see the Pullman worker strike that takes place. And out of this Pullman worker strike, we're going to see President Stephen Grover Cleveland sign into law Labor Day as a federal holiday. Okay, we're going to get to that here in just a minute. All right, now I want to go back to my notes here as well. All right, so I'm going to switch between the PowerPoint presentation here and my notes, because I have like 10 pages of notes that goes deep into this history. So the labor movement fought for fair wages and to improve working conditions. At the labor movement, their fight for fair wages and to improve working conditions is well known, but it was its political efforts. It was the labor movement's political efforts that did nothing less than transform American society. Organized labor was critical in the fight against child labor and for the 8-hour workday and the New Deal. Okay, the New Deal during President Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression, the New Deal, and the New Deal gives us the Social Security Administration and the Social Security Act of 1935. It gives us unemployment insurance. The New Deal gives us the Minimum Wage Act of 1935 as well. We know that the Servicemen Adjustment Act, which is known as the GI Bill of 1944, was the last bill of the New Deal. Okay. All right. So union workers sacrificed in America's historic production. Union workers sacrificed in America's historic production effort in World War II and pushed for Great Society legislation in the 1960s. Now, there's a good article from TheAHNTic.com, called "What Labor Day Meant When Labor Day Meant Something." When Labor Day Meant Something by Michael Patrick. And Michael Patrick is a former local machinist president from Galesburg, Illinois. I'm sorry. The article is by. Let me see who is the article by. Let me pull this up. We have this here. The article is by Chad Broughton, I should say. The article is by Chad Broughton, and he is talking about a former local machinist named Michael Patrick. Okay, so this is an article from TheAtlantic.com called "When Labor Day Meant Something." When Labor Day meant something, and Chad Broughton said, Michael Patrick, a former local machinist president from Galesburg, Illinois, where I've done research, cites his union's support for Medicare and the Civil Rights Act, now celebrating its 50th anniversary, as among his local union's proudest moments. And this article is from September 1st, 2014. September 1st, 2014. Now, those shared victories came at a cost. Those shared victories came at a cost. Agitation for antitrust legislation, shorter work days and work weeks, and the right to organize was often portrayed as un-American and violently repressed. So it was the shed of blood by the labor movement, by white Americans, African Americans, Latinos, etc., that is going to that is rooted in this celebration of Labor Day. And we see the Industrial Revolution play a part of this. And at the foundation of the Industrial Revolution is the labor of enslaved African people. I'm going to come to that in just a minute. Now, I talked about child labor laws, or the lack of child labor laws here in the late 1800s, and there was no 8-day work week. Most Americans worked 12 hours a day, a lot of them 7 days a week, things like this. You did not have these laws that protected the rights of workers and protected the safety of workers, etc. Okay, the labor movement is going to force these laws to come into existence. Now, in 1914, John Kirby, who was president of the National Association of Manufacturers, called the trade union movement, quote, an un-American, illegal, and infamous conspiracy. An un-American, illegal, and infamous conspiracy. Anti-labor employers fought against what they saw as incipient communism with strike breaking, blacklisting, vigilante violence, and by enlisting government force to their side. So when you go study this labor movement, you see corporations exploiting the labor of white people, exploiting the labor of white immigrants coming to this country, and definitely exploiting the labor of African people. As you know, and what white supremacy does is it pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another. You've seen some of my presentations dealing with the Bacon's Rebellion, the 1675 and 1676, which helps to lay the foundation of racial classification in this country. Look up Bacon's Rebellion, BACON''S, Bacon's Rebellion in the colony of Virginia, where you have Nathaniel Bacon, who was a wealthy plantation owner, who leads this rebellion of enslaved Africans, white indentured servants, free African Americans, poor white people, etc. And they realized that they had a common enemy in the wealthy plantation owners in the colony of Virginia, and they lead a rebellion against them to overthrow the colony. And in 1676, they're going to burn down the town of Jamestown, Virginia. Okay, this is Bacon's Rebellion. And it's going to be after Bacon's Rebellion, right around 1681, that the Virginia colony and then the other colonies are going to adopt in widespread usage the term white to classify all the people coming from Europe who we would classify as white, to put them all on, to put them in one category, regardless of how much money they had, how much land they owned, or status, to separate them from the African people who they were uniting with, because they realized that this minority wealthy, the minority wealthy plantation owners had a problem with the masses uniting against them. So they had to separate the masses. So they created these classifications. All right, now, anti-labor movements, anti-labor employers fought against what they saw as incipient communism, okay, with strike breaking, blacklisting, vigilante violence, and by enlisting government force to their side. During the Red Scare of 1919 to 1921. Now, this is during the same time of the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, 1919, 1920, right around that time. And this is at the end of the year after World War I ends. World War I ends in 1918. We know 1919 is also called the Red Summer. The Red Summer of 1919, when you had about 25 major race riots all across this country, and the streets of America were flowing with blood. That's the Red Summer of 1919. Okay, and it was named the Red Summer by James Weldon Johnson, who wrote "Lift Every Voice and Sing," and he said the streets of America were flowing with blood. Okay, so Red Scare 1919, 1921, many states passed blanket sedition laws against radical speech and banned the flying of the red flag. Okay, so this is the Red Scare of 1919. All right, so what was the Red Scare? Okay, and what is sedition? Okay, now you've heard of sedition and dealing with charges brought against Donald Trump, as well, dealing with Mar-a-Lago, and that's dealing with the conspiracy, that's dealing with the Espionage Act. Espionage Act, I think, of 1917. Okay, dealing with Donald Trump. But what is seditious conspiracy? Okay, there's a good article from the Washington Post that deals with this called "What is Sedition?" The charge is the charge of seditious conspiracy is defined in the Federal Criminal Code, section 2384, as an effort by two or more people to, quote, conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States. Okay, an effort by two or more people to, quote, conspire to overthrow, overthrow the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof. They shall each be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. So check out the article. This is just an excerpt of the article from the Washington Post, WashingtonPost.com. What is sedition? What is sedition? This is from January 13th, 2022. Okay, so when we look at the Red Scare of 1919 to 1921, what is the Red Scare? The Red Scare was hysteria over the perceived threat by communists in the United States during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, which intensified in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Communists were often referred to as Reds, R-E-D-S, Reds, for their allegiance to the red Soviet flag. The Red Scare led to a range of actions that had a profound and enduring effect on the U.S. government and U.S. society. Federal employees were analyzed to determine whether they were sufficiently loyal to the U.S. government, and the House Un-American Activities Committee, as well as U.S. Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, investigated allegations of subversive elements in the U.S. federal government and in the Hollywood film industry. The climate of fear and repression linked to the Red Scare finally began to ease in the late 1950s. Okay, and here's Senator Joseph McCarthy, was a Republican from Wisconsin. He was in the U.S. Senate 1947 to 1957. Okay, and there was a Red Scare from about say 1917, 1920, that period of time. The first Red Scare occurred in the wake of World War I. The Russian Revolution in 1917 saw the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, topple the Romanov dynasty, kicking off the rise of the Communist Party and inspiring international fear of Bolsheviks and anarchists. In the United States, labor strikes were on the rise, and the U.S. press, the media, the press, the newspapers, sensationalized them as being caused by immigrants bent on bringing down the American way of life. The Sedition Act, so it's like some Republicans today talk about an invasion of immigrants and things like this, and they're going to change American way of life, etc. You know, and you have the fear of the browning of America, that by 2043, the majority white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. Some white people fear this, others don't. A lot of Republicans do. Okay, so we see history may not exactly repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. The Sedition Act of 1918 targeted people who criticized the U.S. federal government, monitoring radicals and labor union leaders with the threat of deportation. Okay, so we see this anti-government approach to unions. Okay, because the government is going to be pretty pro-corporation. So Labor Day commemorates, you have parades and cookouts, things like this. There was also bloodshed for unions to exist. There was bloodshed for labor rights that exist today. Some of that blood was by African Americans, but we also have to keep in mind, and what gets left out a lot of these Labor Day commemorations and celebrations, things like this, what gets left out by a lot of these celebrations is that the foundation of the Industrial Revolution and the labor movement comes about as a result of the Industrial Revolution, trying to get labor laws put in place to protect workers that are working in factories that have poor sanitation, poor ventilation, no rights to protect children. You have children as young as 5 and 6 working along with their parents in these factories and getting a fraction of what the adults are getting, a fraction and pay what the adults are getting. The foundation of the Industrial Revolution was the enslavement of African people. And the Industrial Revolution is going to begin in the 1790s in Manchester, England. And the crop that's the foundation of the Industrial Revolution is cotton, the production of cotton. And most of that cotton was produced by enslaved African people. Okay. Now, Kev Butterfield said here, I love it when uninformed, ignorant people post here on my page, and I make them black famous. So look, Kev, you're going to become black famous. Kev Nance, I think we need a white American history network. You have one. It's called the History Channel. He must not have cable. It's called the History Channel. I love it when I just let stupid people talk. I love it when they say stupid things like that. It's called the History Channel. Go to history.com, official website of the History Channel. You got one. So he must not have cable. All right, let's continue here. Oh, simple Simon ass people. All right, now let's continue. Okay, so we have all these different things taking place at the same time. The Red Scare, uh, Sedition Act of 1918. History.com, speaking of the White History Channel, Kevin, um, read the article here, Red Scare at history.com. Okay. The Sedition Act of 1918 targeted people who criticized the government, monitoring radicals and labor union leaders with the threat of deportation. Now, Labor Day began not as a national holiday, but in the streets of America, when on September 5th, 1882, thousands of bricklayers, printers, blacksmiths, railroad men, cigar makers, and others took a day off and marched in New York City. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will, read one sign that the protesters were carrying. A placard in the following year's parade read, "We must crush the monopolies lest they crush us. We must crush the monopolies lest they crush us." Now, the movement for the holiday of Labor Day grew city by city, and eventually the state and federal authorities made it official. Okay, so read this article here from TheAHNShow, When Labor Day Meant Something. This is written by Chad Broughton. This is from September 2014. Okay, all right, now let's continue. So why do we celebrate Labor Day? Why do we celebrate Labor Day? Labor Day, as I said, is an annual celebration of workers and their achievements originated during one of American labor history's most dismal chapters. In the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, and as I stated, and we're going to get into this as well, the Industrial Revolution is tied to slavery. The foundation of the Industrial Revolution comes from the products produced by enslaved Africans. In the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, the average American worked 12-hour days and 7-day weeks in order to eke out a basic living. Despite restrictions in some states, children as young as 5 or 6 years old toiled in mills and factories and in mines across the country, earning a fraction of their adult counterparts' wages. People of all ages, particularly the very poor and recent immigrants to the United States, often faced extremely unsafe working conditions with insufficient access to fresh air, sanitary facilities, and work breaks, lunch breaks, bathroom breaks, etc. So, what was the Industrial Revolution? So the Industrial Revolution marked a period of development in the latter half of the 18th century, the 1700s, that transformed largely rural agrarian societies in Europe and America into industrialized urban ones. So they're shifting from an agricultural basis to an industrialized basis where you have factories, things like this. And what happens is because of the transatlantic slave trade, because of, and then the colonization of Africa with the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, where it takes place in Berlin, Germany. It's presided over by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. And these European nations have been fighting and killing each other for hundreds of years, even before the transatlantic slave trade starts, when they were classified as barbarians, the Lombards, the Jutes, the Anglos, the Saxons, the Picts, the Franks, things like this, right? So they're fighting and killing each other for hundreds of years. They're known collectively as barbarians. They organize themselves into kingdoms. Those kingdoms organize themselves into nation states. And then and you have the transatlantic slave trade, and they're fighting and killing each other over the mineral wealth and the natural resources that are in Africa. And they realized that Africa is large enough for them to carve up Africa into colonies, and they don't have to keep killing each other over the riches of Africa. Okay, so you have the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885. And what happens is, because of the almost unlimited natural resources in Africa, this is going to really fuel the Industrial Revolution. Okay, because now you found an almost unlimited source of the rubber and timber and all different types of things like this. And then you have the production of cotton as well in England. And we're going to see the Industrial Revolution is going to begin in the 1790s in the in the 1790s in the Manchester, England area. If we look at this article here from thought.co.uk, this deals with the Berlin Conference. You can read this. So in my online history classes, we get deep into this information. If you haven't registered for my online history classes, you definitely want to do that. I teach one on Saturdays, usually 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. That's visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for that class. But this article here, the Berlin Conference to Divide Africa, the colonization of the continent by European powers. Okay, and it goes through and breaks down the Berlin Conference, and it also shows you the different areas of Africa that were colonized by the respective European countries. Okay, the Berlin Conference was Africa's undoing in more ways than one. The colonial powers superimposed their domains on the African continent. By the time independence returned to Africa in 1950, the realm had acquired a legacy of political fragmentation that could neither be eliminated nor made to operate satisfactorily, end quote. And 1884, at the request of Portugal, now the transatlantic slave trade begins in 1441 with the Portuguese going into Anton Gonzalez going into what is modern day, the area that's modern day Mauritania. Okay, it starts with the Portuguese, and the Spanish are right behind getting involved in the transatlantic slave trade. In 1884, at the request of Portugal, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck called together the major Western powers of the world to negotiate questions and end confusion over the control of Africa. Negotiate questions and end confusion over the control of Africa. Okay, this is all about power and being able to exploit the natural resources of Africa. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck appreciated the opportunity to expand Germany's sphere of influence over Africa and hoped to force Germany's rivals to struggle with one another for territory. At the time of the conference, 80% of Africa remained under traditional and local control. What ultimately resulted was a hodgepodge of geometric boundaries that divided Africa into 50 irregular countries. Now we know we have 50 countries in Africa, okay? But you have this hodgepodge of geometric boundaries that divides Africa into 50 irregular countries. This new map of the continent of Africa was superimposed on 1,000 indigenous African cultures and regions. The new countries lacked rhyme or reason and divided coherent groups of people and merged together disparate groups who really did not get along. Okay, so the most of the geographical boundaries that we see in Africa today are the result of this Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. And we see Great Britain got a ton of land from the Berlin Conference. The countries represented at the time included Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, and the United States of America. Of the 14 nations that were at the Berlin Conference, France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were the major players in the conference, controlling most of colonial Africa at the time. Okay, there was no African representation at the Berlin Conference. All right, so check out the rest of this article here from thought.co, thoughtco.com, dealing with the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885. So as we go through and look at this history, and my approach to dealing with this history is understanding it chronologically, understanding cause and effect. As a historian, my approach to this is different than a 2-minute segment on MSNBC. You may see, I saw some segments that dealt with the history of it. They didn't go, they're not digging into this like I am. And once again, the foundation of the Industrial Revolution is the enslavement of African people. Okay, give us a thumbs up, give us a like, give us a heart on this broadcast. If you like this type of information, also be sure to visit our website, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, TheAfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for the 12-week online history classes I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays is ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So our next class is September 9th, 16th, 23rd, and our last class should be, we're going to early October also. So we're making sure we get in all the content. There's 80 to 100 articles I reference, 15 books that we use in the class. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in the class. We just reduced the price of the course. It's on sale $80. That's $130 value. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. We had a great class on Saturday, September 2nd. As soon as you register, you can watch that. Then on Sundays, we have a couple videos here you can watch, also previews of the class. On Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. We have a few more sessions of that class. That class is on sale $40 as well. All this information is PG-13. You can use this with your children. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Okay, so even after the classes, even after the 12-week online course is over, you'll still have full access. You can still go back and watch the entire course, okay? And if you want to support the African History Network, also in another way, you can do so through Cash App, $ TheAHNShow through Cash App, and through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow. We have the information right on the homepage of our website. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, broadcast our Sunday night show, etc. Pay some of the bills. So you can support us there. $ TheAHNShow through Cash App, through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow through Cash App. When you go to it, it'll say Michael. It may show my picture there, but we have the information on the homepage of our website, because some unscrupulous people set up fake African History Network Cash App accounts, and they've been stealing money from us. So I'm still trying to get those shut down. All right, let's continue here. Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation here. All right, now, hold on, it skipped ahead for some reason. Okay, so then what was the Industrial Revolution? So the Industrial Revolution marked a period of development in the latter half of the 18th century that transformed largely rural agrarian societies in Europe and America into industrialized urban ones. Goods that had once been painstakingly crafted by hand started to be produced in mass quantities by machines in factories, thanks to the introduction of new machines and techniques in textiles, iron making, and other industries. So because of the Industrial Revolution, now you can mass produce these products because you found an almost unlimited amount of raw materials, and because you've built factories, and you have machinery in factories to mass produce these products. Okay. And then at the same time, you have the development of late 1800s or so. You're going to have the development of department stores. You have mass advertising, so you can market all this through newspapers, magazines, things of this nature. Okay. So all this comes together at the same time. All right. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so we have the goods that had once been painstakingly crafted by hand started to be produced in mass quantities. Fueled by the game-changing use of steam power, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain and spread to the rest of the world, including the United States, by the 1830s and 1840s. Modern historians often refer to this period as the first industrial revolution to set it apart from a second period of industrialization that took place from the late 19th century, the late 1800s, to early 20th centuries, and saw rapid advances in the steel, electric, and automobile industries. So read the article. History.com, official website of the History Channel, has a good article called Industrial Revolution. Now, also, more efficient mechanized production meant Britain's new textile factories could meet the growing demand for cloth, both at home and abroad, where the nation's many overseas colonies provided a captive market for its goods. Okay. In addition to textiles, the British iron industry also adopted new innovations. So you're dealing with British colonialism, you're dealing with a demand for these products in British colonies. So let's look at slavery and the Industrial Revolution. Okay, slavery and the Industrial Revolution. And there's a really good article with a number of slides in it from BBC.com, British Broadcasting Company, BBC.com, called Slave Trade and the British Economy. Slave Trade and the British Economy. So from the 1750s onward, a new industry emerged in Britain: the production of cotton cloth. Wool production had previously been Britain's major industry, but cotton had one key advantage: machinery could process cotton fibers better than wool. So we know wool comes from sheep, okay? And you're going to have the demand for cotton, the production of cotton, and a lot of this cotton is going to be produced by enslaved Africans. But then also in 1793 in the US, you're going to have the cotton gin that's going to be created by Eli Whitney. And the cotton gin was a device that picked the seeds out of cotton. You're going to have the cotton gin, and you're going to have copies of the cotton gin as well. And this is going to greatly reduce the cost of producing cotton and drive up the sales of cotton and drive up the value of cotton, drive up the sales of cotton and the demand for cotton and the value of it as well. Okay, as a result, it was in cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began. Particularly in and around Manchester, England. The cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations. Slavery provided the raw material for industrial change and growth. Okay, so this is from bbc.co.uk, the British Broadcasting Company, BBC. This article is called Slave Trade and the British Economy. And what's interesting in a lot of the coverage that I saw dealing with Labor Day this weekend did not make the connection between slavery and the Industrial Revolution and Labor Day. I just find that very interesting. Okay, now let's look at let's go to this article here from the BBC. This is called Slave Trade and the British Economy. There's a couple things I want to highlight here because they have some slides here. We're not going to go through the entire article, but I want to highlight slide 1 and slide 4. Slave trade and the British economy. British profits were made from exporting manufactured goods to Africa and importing products of enslaved labor such as sugar. And we know sugar grows in tropical climates, which is why one of the plantations that the Spanish are setting up, especially Christopher Columbus, when he goes into the Bahamas and Jamaica and in Hispaniola, or what became known as Haiti or Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Honduras, Panama, they're setting up sugarcane plantations because sugarcane grows in warmer climates. Ports such as Glasgow in England, Bristol, and Liverpool prospered as a result of the slave trade. Now, Liverpool, England is where the Beatles are from. So I learned about Liverpool from the Beatles, when I was younger. And, I lived before I started studying history. I learned about Liverpool because that's where the Beatles are from. The slave trade and the British economy. Today we view the history of slavery in terms of its horrific human impact. But in the 18th and 19th century, the 1700s and 1800s, financial considerations dominated the interests of those involved in the slave trade. So they didn't care about the humanity of people because they didn't think African people were human in the first place. It was all about the Benjamins, okay, or the pounds. Okay, it's all about the pounds. Okay, so it was all about money. They didn't care about the humanity because they didn't think African people were human in the first place. Enslaved African people were seen as property, and their experience as human beings was not considered. To understand the extent to which Great Britain has been shaped by the slave trade, it is important to consider the scale and breadth of slavery's impact on the British economy. Okay, so we look in the 1700s, Bristol. We look at these graphics here. Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow are small ports. Okay, in England. 80% of British exports go to Europe. Okay, like wool and then later cotton. 1711, South Sea Company is set up. 1733, the Molasses Act bans import of foreign sugar to North America. 1750, cotton production emerges as a major British industry. 1760, Glasgow, England becomes main UK tobacco importer. 1800, 60% of British exports go to Africa and America. Bristol, Liverpool, Glasgow are major cities. Okay. The British economy was transformed by the transatlantic slave trade. The British economy was transformed by the transatlantic slave trade. Now, this is an example why on May 19th, 2018, which was Queen Charlotte Sophia's birthday, but also Malcolm X's birthday, when Meghan Markle married Prince Harry, and you had a lot of African Americans who watched the royal wedding and got teary-eyed and said they're in love and all this stuff. I said, what the hell does love have to do with it? I said, Meghan Markle is marrying into a family of colonizers. I didn't call them colonizers because they're white. I call them colonizers because Great Britain at one time colonized 1/5 of the world's population. And we know in 1952, when Elizabeth became queen because her father died, 1952, we know at that period, at that point in time, that's right around the time that the Mau Mau Rebellion begins, 1952 to 1956. About a little more than 25% of the world's population lived under British rule. They were colonies of Great Britain. So she married into a family of colonizers. Okay, then some people took exception to what I said, things like that, but the history proved it true. The history proved true of what I was talking about. And all you have to do also is go watch my broadcast I did when Queen Elizabeth II died, because we got deep into that history once again. Read that article I just showed you about the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, and you see I was absolutely correct. Now, in 1700, 80% of British trade went to Europe from ports on the east and south coast in 1700, okay? 80% of British trade went to Europe from ports on the east and south coast. But by 1800, 60% of British trade went to Africa and America. By 1800, 60% of British trade went to Africa and America, sailing from the three main West Coast ports, Glasgow, Liverpool, and Bristol. So 1700, what we call the United States of America, doesn't exist. You have colonies. The American Revolution is 1675 to 1683. Okay, so you don't even have a United States of America in 1700. All right. Now, ports such as London, England, Bristol, and Liverpool prospered as a direct result of involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. Other ports, such as Glasgow, profited from the tobacco trade. Thousands of jobs were created in Britain, supplying goods and services to slave traders. So this is one of the many examples of how the transatlantic slave trade fueled wealth in Britain. And what I was explaining to people who were teary-eyed and distracted by all the opulence and wealth when Meghan Markle married Prince Harry, is I said a good portion of the billions of dollars that Great Britain produced off of the slave trade, I mean, a good portion of the wealth that Great Britain produced from trading goods and things like this. But the opulence that we saw, the gold and all the costumes, all the regalia, all that stuff was profited from, paid for by the blood and the sweat and the labor of enslaved African people. Thousands of jobs were created in Britain supplying goods and services to slave traders. In a period that saw Britain industrialize, profits could be made by exporting manufactured goods to Africa, and then further profits accrued from imported products made using enslaved labor. Imported products made using enslaved labor, such as sugar, which became very fashionable with British people, because in Britain, England, they're known for drinking what? Tea. T-E-A, drinking tea, right? Like you had the Boston Tea Party here in the colonies, revolting against the high prices and the taxation on tea. And this started out as British colonies, right? The United States. What do you put in tea to sweeten it? Sugar. The slave trade was important in the development of the wider economy, W-I-D-E-R, the wider economy. Financial, commercial, legal, and insurance institutions all emerged to support the activities of the slave trade. Now, I just want people to understand, this is not from like an African-centered source. This is from the BBC telling you this. the British Broadcasting Company. They very well documented the transatlantic slave trade and what happened. So they're explaining all this to you. They're not hiding this. Some merchants became bankers, and many new businesses were financed by profits made from slave trading. The slave trade played an important role in providing the British industry with access to raw materials. Okay, and a lot of these raw materials are coming from Africa. The transatlantic slave trade played an important role in providing British industry with access to raw materials. This contributed to the increased production of manufactured goods. The graphic below shows the parts of Britain's economy that benefited from the slave trade. So you have the Industrial Revolution. So what you do, you have a circle. Okay, this is cyclical. You have the Industrial Revolution, you have London and finance, you have the banks that are financing the expansion of the factories, buying more equipment, things of this nature, buying raw materials. You have wealth and income produced. This wealth and income produced, and the need for more raw materials, etc., to produce more products increases the need for enslaved African labor, and the products that the crops that Africans produce, especially cotton. You have shipping and ports. This increases the activity, increases the demand for the production of ships. Also, workers at the docks to unload the ships. You have exports and manufacturing that increases as demand increases. So you have this cycle. All right. Now, I want to go to slide 4. That was slide 1. I'm going to go to slide 4. Slave trade and the British economy. This is from the BBC. So this isn't from Dr. Joseph Ben Yakin. This isn't for Dr. Joseph Ben Yakin. This isn't Dr. John Henry Clark. This isn't Dr. Leonard Jeffries. This isn't who's one of my teachers. This is from Professor James Small. This isn't from Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene or Dr. Malefe Kete Asante or Tony Browder. This is from the BBC. So if you got a problem with this, go argue with them, because they kept very well documented records on what they did. Manufacturing. This is what I wanted to focus on. Economic growth and the Industrial Revolution. Now, for all those watching, and you saw coverage on Labor Day, and you saw the parades take place, and you saw the unions give speeches and things like this, did anybody deal with how the labor movement came out of the Industrial Revolution? And the Industrial Revolution came about by the enslavement of African people and the products that African people produced. Somehow that history gets left out of the conversation. I'm not sure how it gets left. I can't put my finger on it. I'm not sure if they're doing it on purpose. I don't understand how this just gets totally left out of the conversation. I just don't. All right, now. Okay. So economic growth and Industrial Revolution. Many historians describe the Industrial Revolution as a process rather than an event. The part that exports played can be shown as a virtuous circle. The part that exports played can be shown as a virtuous circle. You have the growth of exports. You have the industry growing. You have business owners invest and look for better machines. So you have the development of better machinery to go into factories, expansion of factories, building more factories. Machines get better. They can produce products at a cheaper cost, produce them more efficiently. You're going to have the increase for labor, to hire more people. And as you're producing more products, as you can drive down the price of products as well. And also you have people who have jobs, so they can afford to buy a little something as well. So this also increased a demand for these products. So exports grow. You have products being exported internationally, but you also have the consumption of products domestically. Okay, so we see this cycle. All right, now cotton. From 1750 onwards, a new industry emerged in Britain, the production of cotton cloth. The production of cotton cloth. Wool production had previously been Britain's major industry, but cotton had wool production had previously been Britain's major industry, but cotton had one key advantage. Machinery could produce cotton fibers better than wool. Even like I said, wool comes from sheep. As a result, it was cotton production that began the Industrial Revolution. As a result, it was in cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began, particularly in and around Manchester, England. The cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations. Slavery provided the raw material for industrial change and growth. So you can't talk about the labor movement. You can't talk about Labor Day, and Labor Day comes as a result of the labor movement, and Labor Day becomes a federal holiday in 1894. And the reason why you have a labor movement is because of the Industrial Revolution and the unsanitary and unsafe conditions in those factories. And the labor movement is fighting for regulation of the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution becomes about specifically because of the transatlantic slave trade and the products that African people were creating. You can't talk about Labor Day without talking about the enslavement of African people. But somehow people find a way to do that. The cotton used was mostly imported from slave plantations. Slavery provided the raw material for industrial change and growth. The growth of the Atlantic economy was an integral part of the growth of exports. For example, manufactured cotton cloth was exported to Africa. The Atlantic economy can be seen as the spark for the biggest change in modern economic history. The Atlantic economy in the 1700s was founded on slave labor. Once again, I want everybody to understand, this is not me saying this. This is not Dr. Leonard Jeffries. This is not Professor James Small, Professor Kabahaya Watha Kamene. This is not African Center Scholars. This is the British Broadcasting Company. This is the BBC telling you this, because they kept thorough records of what they did. So I just want everybody to understand this, because you always have people, why are you bringing up old stuff? Why are you talking about history? Oh, this is racist. Well, racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy for the purpose of preserving genetic white survival on the planet is less than 10% European. This does deal with racism. You're absolutely correct. But this deals with history. Key features of the Industrial Revolution: introduction of factories, introduction of cotton, increase in productivity, use of machines, water and steam power, and falling prices. Okay. Key features of the Industrial Revolution included products were made in factories instead of at home. Workers used machines instead of working by hand. The machines were driven by water or steam. One worker could produce much more each day. For example, a cotton spinner could spin 200 times as much cotton in the year 1800 compared to 1700. Cotton becomes Britain's greatest export industry. Okay, so check out the rest of this here. And this is some of the information we get deep into in my online history classes. So if you haven't registered for those, be sure to register for those at our website, TheAHNShow.com, TheAHNShow.com. And we'll post a link here as well. So we do that on Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As soon as you register, you can start watching the content. We have the information right on the homepage of our website. All right, let's continue here. So how you all like this type of information? Are you all learning anything? The history of Labor Day, and I've researched this history thoroughly, the history of Labor Day is much deeper than what you see on TV with the parades, speeches, things like this. And the roots of Labor Day go into the transatlantic slave trade. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, slavery and the Industrial Revolution. Okay, we did that. And let me get, okay, go back to my notes. Okay, so then we're going to have the U.S. Civil Wars, 1861 to 1865. And the Civil War in the United States begins in 1861, April 12, 1861, with the attack on Fort Sumter. South Carolina becomes the first state to secede from the Union, December 20th, 1860, about 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln becomes president-elect. South Carolina and other southern states fear that Lincoln is going to free the enslaved Africans. They secede from the Union, set up the Confederate States of America around February of 1861. You're going to have 11 states that are going to be part of the Confederate States of America. They set up their own government, their own constitution, their own monetary system. The Civil War in the United States begins in 1861 after decades of simmering tensions between North and Southern states over slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. Slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. The election of Abraham Lincoln in November 1860 caused 7 southern states to secede from the Union and form the Confederate States of America, the CSA. 4 more states soon joined. The war between the states, as the Civil War was also known, ended in Confederate surrender in 1865. So April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrenders to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. And this is looked at as the end of the Civil War for all practical purposes, but the Civil War is going to go on for about another 16 months or so until August of 1866, because even though General Robert E. Lee's army was the largest Confederate army, it was not the only Confederate army. There were smaller Confederate armies like General Joseph E. Johnston's Confederate Army of Tennessee, or that staunch white supremacist Nathan Bedford Forrest, his Confederate army. And when you study the Fort Pillow Massacre of 1864. During the Civil War, Nathan Bedford Forrest had about 200 African-American Union soldiers executed, many of them shot point blank in the head. These are staunch white supremacists. He goes on to become the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in 1867. And to a lot of people, he's a national hero in Tennessee. Okay, because remember, it wasn't until about 2021 that they removed the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest from the state capitol in Tennessee. All right, so when you study the history of Tennessee and you look at the persecution of the 2 African-American men in the state legislature there in Tennessee, Justin Johnson, I think it is, and Justin Pearson, you see the persecution of them. You see the suppression of African-Americans in Tennessee. All you have to do is study their history, this former Confederate state, and you see a direct line. All this stuff starts to make sense. This is why we have to understand politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. The legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So we have to vote strategically, and we have to vote these people out of office who are doing us harm, who are passing laws to do us harm. This is all you have to do. If you watch the content that we have on the African History Network, you watch the articles we post, you watch me on Roland Martin Unfiltered as well, we go through and break this down. Okay. So in understanding the history of Reconstruction, the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, and the Reconstruction era leads to the Jim Crow era. It leads to these white supremacists taking back control of the state legislatures, imposing segregation. We look in Tennessee, 1881, Tennessee state legislature They passed segregation laws dealing with public transportation and streetcars. We look at Florida, 1889. Florida passes probably the first poll taxes in the history of this country. Then Mississippi's going to do the same thing in 1890 when Mississippi writes their state constitution. And they write their state constitution. When you go research the writing of these state constitutions, 1890 Mississippi, 1895 South Carolina, 1898 Louisiana, 1901 Alabama, etc., Georgia, Oklahoma. They're doing this to preserve white supremacy. In many of their state constitutions, they're telling you this, and they are passing voter suppression laws. They're passing laws to legalize poll taxes and literacy tests, property ownership requirements, etc., when it comes to voting. And they're doing this to suppress the African American vote, because in many of these states, we were the majority of the population. Okay, so your understanding of history is directly related. Your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. When you understand this history, then you understand why they work so hard to suppress our vote. Why Governor Ron DeSantis submitted a congressional map in Florida, okay, that would gerrymander districts to reduce the voting power of African Americans. You'll understand now. Not to make this a long explanation, because I go deep into this. We talked about this in one of my classes a couple of weeks ago, and in one of our Sunday night shows, we dealt with this. Section 241 of the Mississippi State Constitution. The Mississippi State Constitution of 1890 consists of something like about 250. It's about 250 sections. All right. This article, just to give you a quick example, this article from the Washington Post deals with the Mississippi State Convention of 1890, where they rewrote the state constitution to impose poll taxes, literacy tests, and property ownership requirements. But they also instituted a felony disenfranchisement law. African Americans were the majority of the population of the state of Mississippi in 1890 as a legacy of slavery, and we were the majority of the voters. The name of this article is The Mississippi Plan. The Mississippi Plan to keep blacks from voting in 1890. Quote, "We came here to exclude the Negro. We came here to exclude the Negro." Okay, now this is an excellent article by Ronald G. Schaefer. He's a white man. May 1st, 2021. It talks about Solomon Saladin Calhoun. Solomon Saladin Calhoun was the white county judge who presided over the Mississippi State Convention of 1890 in Jackson, Mississippi, which is the capital. And he said, "Let's tell the truth if it burst the bottom of the universe." He said, "We came here to exclude the Negro." Nothing short of this will answer. This is why they had the Mississippi State Convention, to suppress the African American vote. Delegates eventually adopted a literacy test and poll tax. A poll tax meant you had to pay a tax to register to vote. A poll tax geared to suppress the black vote in a state with a black majority, Mississippi. The Mississippi Plan became the model throughout the South, part of a raft of racially oppressive Jim Crow laws that ended segregation. So all the other Southern states are going to adopt similar state constitutions, okay, to suppress the African American vote. All right, and they're trying to find ways to get around the 15th Amendment of 1870, which guaranteed the right to vote for African American men. It's not going to be until the 19th Amendment of 1920 where women can vote, but we know that in the South, a lot of African American women are not going to be able to vote. And that's why you needed a Voting Rights Act of 1965, because of what happens with these state constitutions and the impediments to the 15th Amendment. This is why you needed a Voting Rights Act of 1965. All right, now, very quickly here, there's an article that I'm looking for. I think this is it right here. The U.S. Supreme Court recently in June of 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear a challenge to the Section 241 of the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, because I hear all these Black conservatives running around saying slavery was a long time ago, Jim Crow era was a long time ago, that doesn't have anything to do with today. That's a lie. Those are people that don't study history, or they do study history and they're trying to deceive people. That's an absolute blatant lie. A lot of those laws and policies are still in effect, and they're shaping policy today. Or if you look at something like the lost cause, which comes about shortly after the Civil War ends, and the lost cause was a revisionist history taught by the South, that the Civil War was about states' rights, it was not about slavery, that the slaves were happy slaves, that the institution of slavery benefited everybody. Okay, and the slaves were too ignorant to take care of themselves, therefore they had to be taken care of by benevolent masters. This is called the lost cause. Go research the lost cause. Okay, this article right here from MississippiFreePress.org, MississippiFreePress.org. Mississippi Jim Crow felony voting law will remain after Supreme Court denies appeal. This is from June 30th, 2023. This stuff is not ancient history, okay? We're seeing how the laws and policies of the past shape the present and the future. This deals with Section 241 of the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890. And the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear a challenge to this felony disenfranchisement law that goes back to 1890 at the Mississippi State Convention. And Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a scathing dissension to the Supreme Court refusing to hear this case. Mississippi's Jim Crow era prohibitions on allowing people convicted of certain crimes to vote will remain after the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal in the case today. The Fifth Circuit, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in favor of upholding the law last year in Harness versus Watson. So that's 2022, Harness versus Watson. Mississippi's white supremacist leaders adopted it in 1890 in an attempt to disenfranchise Black residents for life. Disenfranchise Black residents for life. So if you convicted of certain crimes, murder, things like this, rape in Mississippi, you lost your right to vote for life. It was designed to target African Americans to reduce the number of us who could vote. White lawmakers designated certain crimes that they believed Black people were more likely to commit as lifelong disenfranchising crimes. The law disproportionately disenfranchises Black Mississippians at a higher rate than white residents. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson recounted the law's history today in a dissent against the court's refusal to take up the case. Justice Sonia Sotomayor joined her. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, in her dissent, said, quote, "The president of the 1890 Mississippi Constitutional Convention said it plain. Let us, quote, let us tell the truth if it bursts to the bottom of the universe. We came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer," end quote. To further that agenda, the convention placed 9 crimes in Section 241 of the Mississippi State Constitution as basis for disenfranchisement, believing that more Black people would be convicted of those crimes than white people, end quote, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote. She went on to say, quote, 8 of those crimes have remained in Section 241 since 1890 without interruption. Thus, the convention's avowed goals continue to be realized via its chosen mechanism. Today, Just as in the convention's aftermath, thousands of Black Mississippians cannot vote due to Section 241's operation, end quote. Read the rest of this article here, okay? This is just an example of this history and how it is still impacting us today. All right. Okay, so read that. Okay, let's get back to this. How's everybody doing? Also, once again, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. So let's keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, and we have the information on the homepage of our website as well. When you scroll down past the information about our classes, we have the PayPal Cash App information here. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN Show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael. These other ones are fake African History Network Cash App accounts. So that's why I put the tag here. When you click here, it takes you to our QR code. Okay, and we have our link for PayPal here as well. All right, let's continue. And we have the link here in the thread of the broadcast. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So we have the U.S. Civil War, 620,000 Americans die. You have about close to 200,000 African Americans who fight in the U.S. Civil War, including Harriet Tubman. The conflict was the costliest and deadliest war ever fought on American soil, with some 620,000 of the 2.4 million soldiers killed, millions more injured, and much of the South was left in ruin. Read the article from history.com, American Civil War. Then we have the Reconstruction era. For a 14-year period, the U.S. government took steps to try to integrate the nation's newly freed African-American population into society. Between 1863 and 1877, the U.S. government undertook, now some sources will say it's a 12-year period of time, 1865 to 1877, but the U.S. government undertook the task of integrating nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people into society after the Civil War bitterly divided the country over the issue of slavery. A white slave-holding South that had built its economy and culture on slave labor was now forced by its defeat in a war that claimed 620,000 lives to change its economic, political, and social relations with African Americans. All right, now let's look at this here. So we have the creation of labor unions, which we're going to see really comes into existence after the Civil War ends. Like the National Labor Union is going to be founded in 1866, the year after the Civil War ends and the year after chattel slavery ends. Okay, chattel slavery ends December 6, 1865, when Georgia ratifies the 13th Amendment. You're going to have smaller labor unions that exist. They come about somewhere around the 1840s. But we're really going to see an explosion of them after slavery ends. Many labor unions were created largely to lock out African Americans. So after the Civil War ends in 1865, you're going to have a lot of your large labor unions founded. The National Labor Union, NLU, was founded in 1866. Other labor unions like the American Federation of Labor, AFL, with Samuel Gompers, are founded after slavery ends. So that's right around 1875 or so. It was the enslaved Africans who had the majority of the skills in the United States. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865, and we were largely working for free. A lot of these skills, trades, and crafts we brought with us from Africa. And we've talked about this in our coverage dealing with what's going on in Florida and the suppression of the teaching of African American history in Florida by the Florida Department of Education and Governor Ron DeSantis. We talked about these new social studies standards coming out of Florida, which teach to middle school students that in some cases, enslaved Africans were able to use skilled trades that they learned to their benefit. But we didn't have to be put into an apprenticeship program. We didn't have to be kidnapped and enslaved to be put into an apprenticeship program. As this article and numerous other articles and historical information shows, this piece here from the Washington Post by Jillian Brockel, July 24, 2023, as this details, name of the article, Note to Florida and DeSantis, enslaved Africans were already skilled. African people when we came here, we brought skills with us. Now, it's also important to note, yes, African people are the original people in North, Central, to South America. You read the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, who's a friend of mine. I've interviewed him about 13 times. His book thoroughly documents this. We deal with this in our classes also. We were in this land before Native Americans even came into existence. And the Khoisan, who come from Southern Africa, who have the oldest DNA on the planet, the short-statured Africans. We know the Khoisan, we're here going back at least 51,700 years ago. But in this article, it talks about historical facts. Africans already were skilled before they were enslaved. And in some cases, enslavers sought and purchased people coming from specific African societies based on skills common in those societies. Decades of research, slave ship manifests, plantation ledgers, newspaper articles, letters, journals, and archaeological digs by dozens of scholars support this, much of it compiled in the 2022 book, African Founders, How Enslaved People Expanded African Freedom, by Pulitzer Prize winning historian David Hackett Fisher. Transatlantic slavery was an economic model proposing that skilled laborers who were benefiting themselves and their communities be abducted, transported, and forced to use those skills to benefit others. Other skills such as literacy, ministry, and music making were often banned because they did not benefit and even threaten the enslaver. Hackett Fisher, David Hackett Fisher explains how in the mid 1700s, enslaving colonists in the low country of the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida, Florida once again, enslaving colonists in the low country of the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida targeted people from the windward coast of West Africa, where rice had been cultivated for thousands of years, In the Low Country, enslaved African people then built complex systems of canals, levees, floodgates, and fields, just as they had in West Africa, providing the region with its first massive cash crop, because we came from very sophisticated civilizations. And we used our skills, trades, and crafts that we had in those civilizations to build those civilizations. Then we used them here to build America. But there were African people already here when the Spanish come in 1513, when the English come in 1607. So there were already African people here. In New England, the Puritans targeted Akan-speaking people from the Gold Coast, or Ghana, what we call Ghana, who had a long military tradition emphasizing discipline and quick thinking. Also, an enslaver named Onesimus, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, Onesimus, Onesimus, taught Puritan leader Cotton Mather a technique for smallpox inoculation, which he said was common in African homeland. Now, history.com has an article dealing with this because we were inoculating ourselves from smallpox in West Africa. All right, read the rest of this article here. Note to Florida and DeSantis, enslaved Africans were already skilled. Enslaved Africans were already skilled. Okay, let's go back quickly here to the PowerPoint presentation. So how you all like this type of information? Hopefully you're learning a lot, because this is a lot of research. I got 10 pages of notes, PowerPoint presentation. There's a lot of research to put this together. So we have labor unions being created largely to lock African Americans out of the jobs we were doing for free. And a lot of these jobs are going to go to white immigrants coming to this country and white people who are already here. It was the enslaved Africans who had the majority of the skills in this country. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And we were largely working for free. Now, the book by James Newton and Ronald Lewis, which came out in 1978, called The Other Slaves, Mechanics, Mechanics, Artisans, and Craftsmen. It details at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that we had in this country from 1619 to 1865. All right. And I read different sources that had a portion of these skills, trades, and crafts. But at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, there's a when you go through the main display called "And Still We Rise," there's a when you come out on the other side of it, there's a display, and it shows it's a display on the wall, and it shows these different skills, trades, and crafts that we had. Okay, and I saw it some years ago. This is probably about 10 years ago now that I saw it. And there's a sign there that says you can't take pictures. Okay. So I went home, got a pen and pad, went back and spent an hour writing them down, and I numbered them. So that's how I know that there are 262 of them, because they weren't numbered in the display. And I have the handwritten copy of it somewhere here in my notes and all my copies of the different indictments against Donald Trump and the timeline of history that we use in my Saturday class. I've got the where the hell was that? We have it here somewhere. I've got binders full of the articles that we use in the class, so I don't know where the heck it is now. I had it here. Hold on, where the hell is that? I had it recently. It was, I gotta find it. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere around here. Gotta clean up the office. What is this here? Is this? That's not it. Well, it'll turn up. Let me see what this is. Okay, but anyway, let's continue, because this is going longer than I wanted it to go. But anyway, it's around here somewhere. Okay, this is all stuff on Reconstruction and stuff from the Sunday class. All right, but we were anchor makers. We were artists, bakers, brick makers, barrel makers, bartenders, basket makers, beer makers, blacksmiths, bricklayers, brick makers, cabinet makers, cigar makers, etc., hemp baggers. A lot of these skills we brought with us from Africa. We were jockeys as well, because we were jockeys during slavery, and then after slavery ends, we're going to dominate the Kentucky Derby. We're going to dominate horse racing. The first Kentucky Derby ran in 1875, and it was won by a former slave named Oliver Lewis. He was 19 years old, okay, when the first Kentucky Derby ran. How many people know this? Okay, so this is some deep history that is oftentimes left out of the history books. This is so 13 of the 15 jockeys in the first Kentucky Derby were African American men. I did a lecture back in 2019 called "When Black Men Dominated Horse Racing." When black men dominated horse racing, and let's see here. I'm just going to show you something quickly here from the presentation because it's dealing with this period of history here. Okay, so this is Oliver Lewis. So why were horse racing was a pastime for wealthy white people. Usually, poor white men weren't into horse racing. They weren't gambling on horse racing, things like this, right? They didn't own horses. They didn't own thoroughbreds. Poor white men. So why did African American slaves become jockeys? African American jockeys' dominance in the world of racing is a history nearly forgotten today. Their participation dates back to colonial times when the British brought their love of horse racing to the New World. Founding fathers, or as Dr. Francis Cress Welsing called them, the Foundling Fathers, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson frequented the track. And when President Andrew Jackson, who's a huge white supremacist, who's the favorite president of another white supremacist president named Donald John Trump, former president, indicted co-conspirator Donald John Trump. When President Andrew Jackson moved into the White House in 1829, he brought along with him his best thoroughbreds and his black jockeys. So Andrew Jackson hated African people, but he liked us enough. He was nice enough to let us race his horses for him. Because racing was tremendously popular in the South, it is not surprising that the first black jockeys were slaves. Now, this is a picture of Oliver Lewis here. But when the first Kentucky Derby ran in 1875, May 17th, 1875, 13 of the 15 jockeys were African Americans. Among the first 28 Kentucky Derby winners, 15 of them were African American jockeys. African American jockeys excelled in the sport of horse racing in the late 1800s, but by 1921 they had disappeared from the Kentucky track and would not return until Marlon St. Julian rode in the 2000 race. So the last African American jockey to win the Kentucky Derby was Jimmy Winkfield in 1902. He won it in 1901 and 1902. This is Oliver Lewis. Oliver Lewis won the first Kentucky Derby in 1875. Okay, he was 19 years old. He was a former slave, and his horse trainer's name was Ansel Williams. I think it was Ansel Williams. And he was an older African-American man and a former slave also. Oliver Lewis won the very first Kentucky Derby in 1875 aboard Aristides, the horse Aristides. In addition to this famous first, Oliver Lewis became an analyzer of racing data. His work became very influential in the forming of modern race charts. So the derbymuseum.org has a lot of historical information. This is Jimmy Winkfield. He's a two-time Kentucky Derby racer. 1901, at age 19, Jimmy Winkfield captured his first Kentucky Derby title astride a horse named Eminence. He went on to win 160 races that year. 161 races Jimmy Winkfield won in 1901, including key victories in the Latonia Derby on Hernando and Tennessee Derby, where he rode Royal Victor. Okay, and he's going to go on to race internationally, win a lot of the top races in Europe. So he was the last African American jockey to win a Kentucky Derby that was in 1902. You have William Walker. He was a Kentucky Derby winner as well. And he turns pro at 17. I think he was 17 years old when he turns pro. He wins the Kentucky Derby in 1877. You have Isaac Murphy. Isaac Murphy won the Kentucky Derby 3 times, 1884, 1890, and 1891. Okay, so there's a whole deep, rich history of African-American jockeys that is largely forgotten, All right. Now, let's go back to this one here. Main presentation. Let's close out this one here on jockeys. Let's go back to this one here. All right, now, so skilled trades. Let's look at the labor union of the late 1800s. And there's a book that I'm referencing also called How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, the 3rd edition. How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. Check out this book. It's a small but powerful book. And it's similar to Black Labor, White Wealth by Dr. Claude Anderson, who's one of my teachers also, Dr. Claude Anderson. So the labor union movement of the late 1800s has arguably done more to destroy Black progress than any other known action of white people besides slavery, after slavery. Yet it is almost totally invisible in African-American history. The union movement was specifically designed to do, number one, do 2 main things. Number one, remove African-Americans from their jobs in the skilled trades, which we dominated. Number 2, install in those jobs the European immigrants who were flooding into America by the millions, okay? And these European immigrants also are going to be exploited by these corporations in these factories. Now, scholars attribute the rapid success of immigrant groups directly to these advantages they receive through their membership in the American trade unions. Read pages 37 through 38 of How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, the 3rd edition. And let's see here. I want to make sure I cover all this here. We have this here. Okay. So let me see, we want to pick this up here. I'm looking at my notes. Okay, let me go to my notes here for this. Just bear with me because I'm switching between articles, notes, and some other stuff here. Okay, so I'll show you my notes here because I have 10 pages of notes, but we'll go to it here on the screen share right here. This is what I want to go to. After slavery ends. So after slavery ends, we're going to see a lot of these large labor unions created, and they were created to protect jobs for white men, to keep African Americans out of these unions. And they're going to have contracts with various industries. And let me try to blow this up some more. They're going to have contracts with various industries that you can only hire white men that belong to these unions, then, and this is to lock African Americans out of these jobs. Then from about 1866 to 1880, we're going to see about 12 million European immigrants come to the United States. Okay. And a lot of the jobs that they got should have gone to African Americans because we were the ones doing the work. But the other thing was, is that even though they got these jobs, their labor is going to be largely exploited. So even though these European immigrants get these jobs, their labor is going to be largely exploited, and they're going to be paid very low wages. They're going to work in unsanitary conditions, etc. Okay, so I'm not against unions. I'm not against unions. I'm against racism in labor unions. Okay. Once African Americans are able to get into labor unions, fight against racism to various degrees, labor unions are going to help to create an African American middle class. But it was a hard fight. Okay. Labor unions have done a lot of good things, but when we look at the origins of a lot of these labor unions, it comes out of white supremacy and racism, and it comes out of a need to lock African Americans out of these opportunities. Okay, so read How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. This is from the Nation of Islam Research Group. And it's very well documented that they talk about how the labor union movement of the late 1880s has arguably done more to destroy Black progress than any other known action of white people outside of slavery. But this is largely left out of history. Okay. Now, so we talked about that. While historians have misrepresented Blacks in slavery as being mere field hands, African Americans held a virtual monopoly on almost all skilled and unskilled labor. Okay, we were the engineers, shipbuilders, tailors, shoemakers, carpenters, etc. Let's see here. Okay, so we covered that pretty much already. The origins of Labor Day, the Industrial Revolution, 1790s. We did that. So as manufacturing increasingly replaces an agricultural basis, as the wellspring of American employment, labor unions, which had first appeared in the late 18th century, which is the late 1700s, we're going to first see labor unions we're going to see a lot of small labor unions. Then they're going to grow more prominent after slavery ends, and they become more vocal because because you're replacing a agricultural basis with a manufacturing basis. All right, let's see. Okay, you have an industrial revolution here in the US and the 1880s, and you have labor unions began organizing labor strikes and rallies to protest poor conditions and compel employers to renegotiate hours and pay. Many of these events turned violent during the period of time, including the infamous Haymarket riot of 1886, in which several Chicago policemen and workers were killed. Other protests and strikes gave rise to longstanding traditions. On September 5th, 1882, 10,000 workers took unpaid time off from work to march from City Hall in Union Square in New York City, holding the first Labor Day parade in U.S. history. Now, the idea of a working man's holiday celebrated on the first Monday in September caught on in other industrial centers across the country. And many states passed legislation recognizing it. Congress would not legalize the holiday until 12 years later, in 1884, when a watershed moment in American labor history brought workers' rights squarely into public's view. Okay. And this was the Pullman Palace Car Company strike by the Pullman workers. Okay. Now, the Pullman Porters, who were African American, the Pullman Porters were not allowed to strike because they were not allowed to join the union. When we look at George Pullman, and this history on George Pullman is fascinating, and this is going to be this ties into the Panic of 1893, which we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. So George Pullman founds the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago in 1867. He's also going to actually found a town called Pullman, Illinois, where his workers are going to live. And he's going to found a bank in Pullman, Illinois as well. So George Pullman is going to cut wages as rents continue during the Panic of 1893. Cuts to wages and rents endure. Despite growing tensions among George Pullman's workers, George Pullman's vision of a paternalistic community organized around a factory fascinated the American public for a time. When Chicago hosted the Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair of 1893, international visitors flocked to see the model town created by George Pullman. So his workers lived in quarters that George Pullman owned. Rent was taken directly out of their paychecks. Okay. Things changed dramatically with the Panic of 1893, which was a severe financial depression that affected the American economy. George Pullman is going to cut the wages of his workers by 1/3, but he refused to lower the rent of his workers in the company housing that he owned. He cuts wages by 33%, but he did not cut their rent. So the depression set off by the Panic of 1893 was the greatest depression America had known, and was only surpassed by the Great Depression of the 1930s. In early May 1893, the New York stock market dropped sharply, and in late June, panic selling caused the stock market to crash. A severe credit crisis resulted in more than 16,000 businesses failed by the end of 1893, including and it also included the failed businesses of about 156 railroad companies and nearly 500 banks. Okay. Unemployment spread until 1 in 6 American men lost their jobs. Thoughtco.com has an article, Financial Panics of the 19th Century. Okay, so check out that article. Now, the town just outside of Chicago had been built as a utopian for George Pullman's workers. And I'm going to go back to my notes for this here. Okay, how you doing, Trinace? Let's see here. Let's flip over to this. Okay, the inventor of the Pullman car right here. Okay, so George Pullman, who was the inventor of the Pullman car, which was a sleeping car on railroads that because people are traveling across the country. They're not flying at this time. They're traveling across the country by railroad. Okay. He was born in 1831 in upstate New York. He was the son of a carpenter. He learned carpentry himself and moved to Chicago, Illinois in the late 1850s. During the Civil War, George Pullman began building a new kind of railroad passenger car, passenger car, which had berths for passengers to sleep. Pullman's cars became popular with the railroads, and in 1867, he formed the Pullman Palace Car Company, Okay. He was the creator of the railroad sleeping car, and he's going to found a town in Pullman, Illinois for his, he's going to found a town in Illinois called Pullman, Illinois. He founded this town for his employees. The town just outside of Chicago had been built as a utopian home for George Pullman's workers, but the utopia was designed to serve George Pullman above all others, according to PBS.org, Public Broadcasting System. Quote, its residents all worked for the Pullman Company, PBS notes. Quote, their paychecks drawn from Pullman Bank, because he owned a bank, and their rent set by George Pullman deducted automatically from their weekly paychecks, end quote. From 1880 to 1893, all seemed well in Pullman Town until an economic depression prompted George Pullman to cut his employees' wages, even though their rents remained the same. The workers walked out. In solidarity, members of the American Railway Union, founded by fiery socialist Eugene Debs, according to Time magazine, the American Railway Company took up the cause of the George Pullman workers who are striking, and the 150,000 members of the American Railway Union refused to work on trains carrying George Pullman's sleeping cars, prompting a nationwide transportation nightmare. Now, you may have heard the name Eugene Debs recently in the media behind the indictments of Donald Trump, because people are saying that Donald Trump can still run for president from prison. And a precedence for this would be when Eugene Debs ran for president of he ran for United States president representing the Socialist Party, and he ran for president from prison. So when you hear about Eugene Debs, the socialist, running for president from prison, this is who they're talking about. Eugene Debs was the president of the American Railway Union, who joined in 1893, his union joined along with the Pullman worker strikers in this strike against George Pullman. All right, let's go back to my notes. We're going to wrap up this here in a few minutes, hopefully. In the early 1880s, as his company prospered and his factories grew, Pullman began planning a town. Okay, so he built the town. He had a theater in the town, etc. Saloons, dance halls. and other establishments that would have been frequented by working class Americans of that time were not allowed in the city limits of Pullman, Illinois. And it was widely believed that company spies kept a watchful eye on the workers during their hours off the job. The intrusiveness of management in the private lives of workers naturally became a source of resentment. Okay, now, so we have this Panic of 1893. Read the article Financial Panics of the 19th Century from thoughtco.com. Orders for railroad sleeping cars declined, and George Pullman was forced to lay off hundreds of employees. Those who remained endured wage cuts, even while rents in George Pullman, in Pullman Town, Pullman, Illinois, remained consistent. Take-home paychecks plummeted. And so the employees walked out, demanding lower rents and higher pay. The American Railway Union, led by socialist Eugene V. Debs, came to the cause of the striking workers, and railroad workers across the nation boycotted trains carrying George Pullman's cars. Rioting, pillaging, and burning of railroad cars soon ensued. Mobs of non-union workers joined in. Okay, so the Pullman worker strike spreads nationwide. Outraged by the strike at his factories, George Pullman closed the plant, determined to wait out the workers. Pullman's stubborn strategy might have worked except for the American Railway Union members who joined in the strike. Now, the strike instantly became a national issue, and President Grover Cleveland, who won the presidential election, who just been elected president again, because he's the only president to win 2 non-consecutive terms. Benjamin Harrison was the president in 1893. Then Stephen Grover Cleveland wins the election, becomes president again. President Stephen Grover Cleveland, faced with nervous railroads, railroad executives, and interrupted mail trains, declared the strike a federal crime and deployed 12,000 troops to break the strike. Violence erupted, and 2 men were killed when U.S. deputy marshals fired on protesters in Kensington, Illinois, near Chicago, but the strike was doomed. On May 11th, 1894, employees of the Pullman Car Company in Chicago went on strike to protest wage cuts and the firing of union representatives. Okay. Then on June 26, 1894, the American Railway Union, led by Eugene Debs, called for the boycott of Pullman railway cars, crippling railroad traffic nationwide. To break the Pullman strike, the federal government dispatched troops to Chicago, 12,000 U.S. troops, unleashing a wave of riots that resulted in the deaths of more than a dozen workers. Okay, so there was bloodshed in the streets behind this strike, this nationwide strike. So people still ask the question of who created Labor Day. We don't know exactly who created Labor Day. We do know on June 28th, 1894, President Grover Cleveland signed Labor Day into law. In the wake of this massive unrest and in an attempt to repair ties with American workers, Congress passed an act making Labor Day a legal holiday in the District of Columbia and U.S. territories. On June 28, 1894, President Stephen Grover Cleveland signed this act into law. More than a century later, the true founder of Labor Day has yet to be identified. Many credit Peter J. McGuire, co-founder of the American Federation of Labor, while others have suggested that Matthew McGuire, M-A-G-U-I-R-E, a secretary of the Central Labor Union, with first proposing the holiday. Okay, so there's an article from theatlantic.com on this also. Read that. And there's a good article from Time Magazine called How a Bloody Railroad Strike Paved the Way for the First Labor Day. How a bloody railroad strike paved the way for the first Labor Day. Now, when we look more at African-American roots of Labor Day, we deal with George Pullman and the Pullman Palace Car Company, and the fact that the African-American Pullman Porters, who many of them were former slaves, were not able to participate in this strike. When a Pullman car was leased to a railroad, it was equipped with highly trained porters to serve the travelers. These cars were staffed with recently freed slaves who George Pullman judged to be skilled in service and willing to work for low wages. Soon, the Pullman Rail Car Company, was the largest employer of African Americans in the country, with the greatest concentration of Pullman porters living on Chicago's South Side. So Labor Day was nationally established after the Pullman Strike of 1894, when President Stephen Grover Cleveland sought to win political points by honoring dissatisfied railroad workers. This strike did not include African-American Pullman porters or conductors on trains, but for the Black porters, racism fueled part of the workers' dissatisfaction and was never addressed. Okay, so it's going to be after the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters is founded by Phillip Randolph in 1925. It's going to be after that these workers are going to be able to go on strike. Okay, so Phillip Randolph and president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, also called Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and Maids, M-A-I-D-S, was the first African-American labor union to be affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. It was founded in 1925 by labor organizer and civil rights activist Phillip Randolph, who's also a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, my fraternity. You heard me mention that on Roland Martin Unfiltered when we talked about the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. And I didn't agree with Phillip Randolph on everything. I disagreed with him on the Marcus Garvey Must Go campaign, but other things I agreed with him on. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters aim to improve the working conditions and treatment of African-American railroad porters and maids employed by the Pullman Company, by George Pullman, a manufacturer and operator of railroad cars. The BSCP, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, embodied Phillip Randolph's belief that segregation and racism were linked to the unfair distribution of wealth, and power that condemned tens of millions of African American and white Americans to chronic misery. Britannica.com, Encyclopedia Britannica, has a good write-up on the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. You can check that out at Britannica.com. Now, in their home neighborhoods, to be a Pullman porter was considered a prestigious position. The job offered a steady income, a opportunity, a steady income, a and an opportunity to travel across America, and a life largely free of heavy physical labor, which was rare for African Americans in that era. Historian Tamil Black recounts they were good looking, clean, and immaculate in their dress. Their style was quite manly. Their language was very carefully crafted so that they had a sense of intelligence about them. They were good role models for young men. And I remember there was a documentary in the last few years about the Pullman Porters also, these African American men. But the porters were also mistreated, underpaid, and subjected to countless indignities on the job. A Pullman, quote, a Pullman porter was really kind of a glorified hotel maid and bellhop in what George Pullman called a hotel on wheels. And what George Pullman called a hotel on wheels explains former Pullman porter and historian Greg Leroy. Read the article from blackpast.org called Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, that breaks down this history. And blackpast.org, they have about 6,000 pages of articles dealing with African history and African American history. So that's one of the sources I use in my classes. If you go back to my notes here quickly, this is on page 7 of my notes. Let's see, where are we here? The Pullman Company, I want to go to this citation here. Where are we? Right here. Okay. So the Pullman Company just thought of the porters as a piece of equipment, just like another button on a panel. The same as a light switch or a fan switch. The same as a light switch or a fan switch. And let's see here. I'm going to pull up this article. Blackpast.org. Okay, this piece right here. Let's go to this. Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, 1925 to 1978. This is from blackpast.org. All right. This is a mass meeting of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1933. Let's see. I want... Where is that? Okay, I'm not sure what that is. Okay, check out this article here. I'm just going to go back to my notes. I'm trying to show you the actual article, but Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, is that the same thing? Okay, I'll just go back to my notes on this. Okay, so the Pullman Company just thought of the Pullman Porters as a piece of equipment, just like another button on a panel. The same as a light switch or a fan switch, end quote. George Pullman demanded 400 hours a month or 11,000 miles. Okay, 400 hours a month or 11,000 miles from his Pullman porters, sometimes as much as 20 hours at a stretch, and he paid them ridiculously low wages. So in 1926, an average, they were paid an average of $810 a year in 1926. That's about 7,500 in today's dollars. Quote, it did not pay a livable wage, but they made a living with tips that they got because the salary was nothing, says Lynn Hughes of the A. Phillip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum, the A. Phillip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum. The company expected its employees to pay for their own meals, supply their own uniforms, and supply their own shoe polish, and allow them only short naps on couches in the smoking car. Disgruntled Pullman porters began to question the situation and decided to take on the enormously powerful company. In 1925, the Pullman porters formed a union called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. This marked the beginning of a 12-year struggle for dignity, better working conditions, and fair pay. Its leaders were charismatic Black activist A. Phillip Randolph and former Pullman porter Milton Webster, head of the Chicago Union Local. Their eventual triumph marked the first time in American history that a Black union forced a powerful corporation to the negotiation table. It was a significant step forward for Black equality. It was a significant step forward for Black equality. And let me see here. I'm looking at this article here. Just bear with me because I have a ton of information here. Okay, that's from a different article. I think this had to be the article from Public Broadcasting System from pbs.org. That's what that is. That was Tamil Black. So that was Brotherhood Sleeping Car Porters. Regular. Okay. This is one of these articles. But we've got the I've got the notes here, so that's fine. We'll just roll with that. Okay, let's continue. Their eventual triumph marked the first time in American history that a Black union forced a powerful corporation to the negotiation table. It was a significant step forward for Black equality. The union members learned how to organize. They discovered that even in a time of great prejudice in America, Blacks could effect change if they stood together. Okay, so this was like something like really, really important that I gathered from this in researching this history back when I originally did this presentation, like in 2019. I was researching all this history. This is an example of African Americans working together for an extended period of time. This is before the modern day civil rights movement. The modern day civil rights movement partly has its roots in the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the organization, and their 12-year strike that they had. Okay, that 12-year fight that they had. They would later apply these techniques to the civil rights movement. They would later apply these techniques to the civil rights movement. We know that A. Phillip Randolph is going to become instrumental in the modern day civil rights movement. And he was looked at as one of the big six Negro leaders. Negro leaders also. So the union members of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porter learned how to organize and negotiate. And I'm going to try to pull something else up as well. Okay. All right. Okay, so they learn how to negotiate, learn how to organize and negotiate as well. And let me pull this up here. Okay, we'll go back to that. Just give me a minute. All right. Okay, so we know that A. Phillip Randolph becomes one of what's known as the Big Six Negro leaders, Big Six African American leaders during the modern day civil rights movement. He's one of the architects of the March on Washington. And these African American men discovered that even in a time of great prejudice in America, African Americans could affect change, could bring about change if they stood together and persevered. Once again, it's important to understand that these African Americans organized, and they formed this organization, and they realized even at a time of racial prejudice and racism in America in the late 1920s and 30s, they realized that they could bring about change if they stood together and persevered. Now, these tactics were later applied to the civil rights movement, the modern day civil rights movement. So even though we look at the modern day civil rights movement starting in December of 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott, which started Monday morning, December 5th, 1955, or some people take it back to the lynching of Emmett Till, August 28th, 1955, and what takes afterwards, the effort to force a trial to gather information on the killers of Emmett Till, and the support given to Emmett Till's family and the international attention on this lynching of this 14-year-old boy. His cousin, and we know his cousin Simeon Wright passed away in September 2017. Okay. But we see the seeds of the modern day civil rights movement in the fight of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. TheRoot.com had a good article and a video clip from September 4th, 2017 called America's Racist History of Labor. America's Racist History of Labor. So you can check that out also, America's Racist History of Labor. Now, you also have Isaac Myers. Isaac Myers is let's see here. Let's go back over to the PowerPoint presentation. Isaac Myers was the president of the Colored National Labor Union in 1869. Colored National Labor Union. So Isaac Myers was a mason, brick mason, labor leader, born in Baltimore, January 13th, 1835. He was the son of free African-American parents, but grew up in a slave state of Maryland. Isaac Myers received his early education from a private day school of a local clergyman named Reverend John Forty. Since the state of Maryland provided no public education for African-American children at the time, at age 16, Isaac Myers became an apprentice to James Jackson, who was a prominent African-American Baltimore ship caulker. 4 years later, Isaac Myers was supervising the caulking of clipper ships operating out of Baltimore. The newly created union, now during the Civil War, Isaac Myers worked as a porter and shipping clerk for a grocer, and then returned to his original profession as a caulker. Soon after the war ended, the Civil War ends in 1865, Isaac Myers found himself unexpectedly unemployed when a group of white caulkers protested the employment of black caulkers and longshoremen. In response to the strike, Isaac Myers proposed the creation of a union of black caulkers, Caulkers. The newly created union, called the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society, decided to form a cooperative company that would own a shipyard and railroad. Okay, and we have a deep, rich history of cooperative economics. Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard's book, Collective Courage, breaks down this history. This is one of the books that we use in my online history classes. Also, this book here, Collective Courage, A History of African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Collective Courage, A History of Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice by Jessica Gordon Nimhard. And the concept of the cooperatives, these were principles that we brought with us from Africa. All right, now, so he forms the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society. And they decided to form a cooperative company that would own a shipyard and railroad, pooling their resources. The workers issued stock and quickly raised $10,000 in subscriptions among Black Baltimore residents. They also borrowed another $30,000, and on February 12, 1866, they purchased a shipyard and railway, which they named the Chesapeake Marine Railway, which was and dry dock company. Okay, so they did this in 1866. All right, blackpast.org has a good article on Isaac Myers, and I'm going to go to that here. Let me pull this up. Isaac Myers. So when we study, how we were using the cooperative system, and I've done presentations on this in the past, and we deal with This is how we engaged in economics. A lot of these economic empowerment gurus out here that are preaching white capitalism and black people investing green dollars in the white-owned stock market and trying to pass that off as economic empowerment, because it's not. You can create wealth, but economic empowerment and wealth creation are not the same thing. You got a lot of these economic empowerment gurus out here using the term economic empowerment and wealth creation interchangeably. They're not the same thing. Economic empowerment occurs when we control the economics in our community. We own the land, we own the majority of the businesses, we own the gas stations, radio stations, grocery stores, dry cleaners, multi-story buildings, etc., on the newspapers, the media in our community. That's economic empowerment. We could all have stock portfolios. I want to make sure everybody understands this. We could all have stock portfolios valued at $5 million, and we could still spend 97% of our dollars with people that don't look like us. You have wealth creation, you don't have economic empowerment. And there are a lot of economic empowerment gurus, or whatever they want to call themselves, out here using the terms interchangeably. They're not the same thing. I'm not against wealth creation, but we have to be clear on what we're doing. Black people investing green dollars in white-owned corporations is not economic empowerment. You can create wealth. Now, you can take that wealth and you can use that to buy up the land, buy up houses, own grocery stores, own radio stations, TV stations. You can use that wealth to buy assets in our community so we can control the economics and control the politicians in our communities. But we cannot confuse wealth creation with economic empowerment. Those are two entirely different things. They come from two different mindsets. When you understand history, you understand what Isaac Myers was doing and others, they're talking about economic empowerment and controlling the economics in their own communities and being able to employ their own people. That's a different mindset than just creating wealth. So they also borrowed another $30,000, and on February 12th, 1866, 1 year after slavery ended, they purchased a shipyard and railway, which they named the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company. Within months, the cooperative employed 300 black caulkers and received several government contracts. This is in 1866, not 1966, 1866, the year after the Civil War ended and chattel slavery ended. Ultimately, it employed a number of white workers as well. The success of Isaac Myers Union in Baltimore encouraged black caulkers in other seaport cities to organize. It also caught the attention of the National Labor Union Executive Committee. The National Labor Union, which was founded in 1866, largely to lock African Americans out of the jobs that we have been doing for free. In 1869, the National Labor Union invited Isaac Myers Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society to its annual convention meeting in Philadelphia. The National Labor Union declared it would welcome African American unions to its federation. Meanwhile, Isaac Myers was elected president of the Colored National Labor Union, the first organization of its type in U.S. history. Isaac Myers appealed to black workers to join unions and called on white unions to accept them as full members. Expecting the full support of the National Labor Union, he soon learned that the predominantly white organization insisted that black union members abandon the Republican Party and join the Labor Reform Party. So at this time, the Republican Party was largely the party of African Americans because they were the party of Lincoln. Okay, this is before Reconstruction, this is before the Republicans betrayed African Americans with the Compromise of 1877 that most of these Black conservatives out here don't want to talk about. Okay, and they agreed to that Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the Republican candidate for president in the 1876 presidential election, they agreed that he would remove the remaining Union troops out of the South to allow the Democrats and the white supremacists to take back full control of the state governments in the South. Okay, this is the Compromise of 1877. All right, now, when Black Union members led by Isaac Myers refused to abandon the Republican Party, they were not invited back to the National Labor Union. With no allies among the large labor movement, the colored National Labor Union soon found itself isolated. It collapsed by 1871. Isaac Myers held a variety of other positions, but his years of prominence were over. He worked as a detective for the Baltimore Post Office between 1872 and 1879. Between 1879 and 1882, he operated a small Baltimore coal yard, C-O-A-L. All right, read the rest of this about Isaac Myers at blackpast.org and the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society, the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society. Now, Frederick Douglass was vice president of a colored labor union. Where is that? Right here. The Colored National Labor Union, 1872. He's going to become president. He was vice president of a colored labor union and becomes president of one. Also becomes president of one as well. So blackpast.org has some information on that, and I had where's that article? I had some information on that dealing with Frederick Douglass also. There is a good article from newsone.com that deals with where is that? Oh, it's five Black-led labor unions that paved the way for Black workers' rights. Yeah, 5 Black-led labor unions that paved the way for Black workers' rights. So check this out from newsone.com. This is a good article. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this. This is from September 5th, 2022. 5 Black labor unions that paved the way for Black workers' rights. And I'm going to close out this ad. They talk about the, let's see here. Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. They talk about the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The Colored National Labor Union. The Colored National Labor Union. Waiting for this to keep loading. Okay. Colored National Labor Union. They talk about the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, the National Domestic Workers Union, and the American League of Colored Laborers. The American League of Colored Laborers. Okay, led by Frederick Douglass, created in 1850. The American League of Colored Laborers. Okay, so you can check that out as well. 5 Black-led labor unions that have paved the way for Black workers' rights. Okay, so I think that's everything. I know I had a lot of information. It's a deep history, and a lot of this history does not get covered in especially mainstream media when they talk about Labor Day, and even if they mention African Americans, a lot of this stuff does not get covered. So since I have my own platform and I'm a historian, I want to make sure we covered it here today. So hopefully you learned a lot. Uh, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network as well. Register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. We have the information at our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. On Saturdays is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. You don't have to be present in the class. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You go back and watch it anytime. So we have classes September 9th, September 16th, September 23rd, and going into October. Classes on sale $60, regularly $130. As soon as you register, the archive sessions of the classes you can watch. You can watch these free previews here also. And then on Sundays, I teach Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Okay, and this content is PG-13. You can use this with your children. It's not overly graphic. It's not vulgar. It's very visual. So we have book references. I'll show you the book references on the screen. There's about 80 to 100 articles that we cite. The video clips also. You can also support us through Cash App, $ TheAHNShow, through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow. So this helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc., pay for all these services that I use to broadcast and upgrade equipment, etc. Okay. All right. So hopefully you learned a lot today. There's a deep, rich history when we deal with Labor Day that does not get covered in mainstream media. So we have to have our own media to be able to cover this history, and you need somebody who understands this history like myself to be able to teach it. Okay, so definitely appreciate the support. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Follow us on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Turn on live notifications so you know when we go live. Turn on and hit the bell so you know when we upload new videos. Subscribe there and follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Turn on live notifications there also. Okay. Hopefully you learned a lot. Hope to see you in class. Remember, right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. Peace.